妙法蓮華経南無妙法蓮華経。Oh, there we go. All right. Hi, everyone. Let's continue this very large Go show. In the Emerging from the Earth chapter, in the Lotus Sutra, a multitude of bodhisattvas who had not been seen previously in the more than 40 years of the Buddha's preaching life suddenly appeared. And the Buddha says, quote, I taught and converted them and caused them for the first time to set their minds on the way, end quote. Bodhisattva Maitreya, puzzled by this announcement, says, World-honored one, when the thus come one was crowned prince, you left the palace of the Shakyas and sat at the place of meditation not far from the city of Gaya, and there attained supreme perfect enlightenment. Barely 40 years or more have passed since then. World-honored one, how in that short time could you have accomplished so much work as a Buddha? Now, this is, again, you have to understand, this is a thought exercise, right? All of these sutras are thought exercises. So the declaration that all of these hundreds of thousands of bodhisattvas that have shown up, these personages representing you and I, as accomplished practitioners of the Buddha way, bodhisattvas, now appear in this sermon in the sky, this story. And one of the people who was already there, Maitreya, quite accomplished bodhisattva himself, asked the Buddha, how in the world did you teach all these hundreds of thousands of bodhisattvas when you've only been on the planet 40 years, or teaching 40 years? You yourself attained enlightenment when you were 30. How did you manage to pull all of this off? So the story is addressing doubt, right? Because still to this day, people think, humans, we think in our reality, in our lifetime, in our lifespan, in this, not even our lifetime, in this span of our life, this whatever's most recent and what we think will come. We barely sit in this moment. We're always thinking about what got us here and where we might go, rather than focusing on the immense, incredible moment that we're in, right? So the Buddha, this story is dealing with this. And what he's saying is, yes, you call me the Buddha, but only because I'm showing you what Buddha looks like. All of you have Buddha. Buddha is enlightenment. Buddha is a mental state that you choose to be in instead of the human condition of constantly being attached to everything. So he's introducing this here by saying, I didn't become Buddha when I turned 30. I just woke up to Buddha when I became 30. So all these people who are pursuing the Buddha way have been taught by Buddha, not me, but Buddha way, Buddha-ness, that mental perception. Do you understand? So here it is. In order to dispel this doubt and puzzlement, Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, then preaches the lifespan chapter. This is Nichiren talking, right? So he's explaining to his people, what is this? 2,500 years after the Buddha's passing, he's still explaining to people, as I am today, as others are today, that this is what's happening in the Lotus Sutra. This is the tremendous importance of the Lotus Sutra amongst all sutras, is that this is finally, the nail is being driven into the board here as a construction, not anyway. Referring first to the version of the events presented in the earlier sutras and the theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra, he says, quote, "In all the worlds, the heavenly and human beings and Asuras all believe that the present Shakyamuni Buddha, after leaving the palace of the Shakyas, seated himself in the place of meditation, not far from the city of Gaya, and there attained supreme perfect enlightenment. But then, in order to dispel their doubts, he says, but good men, it has been immeasurable, boundless hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of nayutas of kalpas since I, in fact, attained Buddhahood." This is a critical point of perception, delineating the all-encompassing and a priori of Buddha as a fundamental quiescent energy inherent in all phenomena and throughout time without measure. He was trying to break down their understanding of him as Buddha and Buddha as a condition, a perception that is without time, that is imbued in everything that we experience in samsara as human. All the other sutras, such as the Flower Garland Wisdom, the Mahavarachana, not only conceal that fact that people of the two vehicles can attain Buddhahood, but that they also fail to make clear that the Buddha attained enlightenment countless kalpas in the past. In other words, Buddha is not a humanness as much as it is a quality of all things which we humans can perceive. These sutras have two flaws. First, because they teach that the 10 worlds are separate from one another, they fail to move beyond the provisional doctrines and to reveal the doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, as it is expounded in the theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra. Remember, Tendai himself, 700 years before Nichiren, was teaching this. Second, because they teach that Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment for the first time in this world, referring only to his provisional aspect, they fail to reveal the fact stressed in the essential teaching that the Buddha attained enlightenment countless kalpas ago. Again, the wording is tricky here, right? Because it's attained enlightenment. They say the Buddha attained enlightenment. It really, Shakyamuni attained Buddhahood in this life. I wonder how the original Japanese reads on this. These two great doctrines are the core of the Buddha's lifetime of teachings and the very heart and marrow of all the sutras. So you see, what I just said indicates to you the difficulty in studying Buddhism, because you're studying, especially in the West, translation after translation after translation, and translations of different languages in different eras, in different countries, in different cultures, translated from various other languages. Again, I go back to what Shakyamuni Buddha himself exhorted his students to do. Look for the meaning. Don't get stuck on the words. Look for the meaning. And the meaning here, even though it may seem unclear because of the way this is translated, the meaning is quite clear. The Buddha, referred to in all of these as Shakyamuni, the great saint from the Shakyas, Shakyamuni, is actually a human teaching what it is to be Buddha. He is not, in fact, the Buddha, but a Buddha. Buddha, a manifestation of what Buddha is, which is accessible to all things. The Expedient Means chapter, which belongs to the theoretical teachings, expounds the doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, making clear that persons of the two vehicles can achieve Buddhahood. It thus eliminates one of the two errors found in earlier sutras, but it nevertheless retains the provisional aspect and fails to reveal the eternal aspect of the Buddha's enlightenment. So, he's saying the lotus and even its structure builds slowly toward this enlightenment, this truth. You have to understand, if this is difficult for people to understand today, how much more difficult was it 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 2,600 years ago, right? Excuse me. Thus, the true doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life remains unclear, and the attainment of Buddhahood by persons of the two vehicles is not properly affirmed. Such teachings are like the moon seen in the water or rootless plants that drift on the waves. When we come to the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra, then, the belief that Shakyamuni first obtained Buddhahood during his present lifetime is demolished, and the effects of the four teachings are likewise demolished. When the effect of the four teachings are demolished, the causes of the four teachings are likewise demolished. Thus, the cause and the effect of the 10 worlds as expounded in the earlier sutras and the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra are wiped out, and the cause and effect of the 10 worlds in the essential teachings is revealed. This is the doctrine of original cause and original effect. It reveals that the 9 worlds are all present in the beginningless Buddhahood, and that Buddhahood is inherent in the beginningless 9 worlds. This is the true mutual possession of the 10 worlds, the true 100 worlds and 1,000 factors, the true 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. In fact, I would say that this is the cosmology of Buddhism, the very definition of the formation of the universe and all phenomena, right here. When we consider the matter in this light, we can see that Vairocana Buddha, seated on the lotus pedestal of the 10 directions, as described in the Flower Garland Sutra, the little Shakyamuni described in the Agama Sutras, and the provisional Buddhas described in the sutras of the correct and equal and the wisdom periods, such as the Golden Light, Amida, and Vairocana Sutras, are no more than reflections of the Buddha of the lifespan chapter. Do you understand what that means now? Reflections? In other words, all of these are personages or incarnation. I don't want to say incarnations because that is too much charisma. Manifestations or realizations is the right word, in human form or in the story of human form of Buddha-ness, of what is this fundamental realization of this fundamental energy, right? The manifestation from quiescence to experience, right? Buddha is an experience. It's a perception, a cognitive perception, an experience we humans can perceive, we can engage with. This is amazing. And it's already there. We just have to focus our minds on realizing it. This is awakening. This is enlightenment. They are all like fleeting reflections of the moon that float on the surfaces of various large and small bodies of water. You wouldn't make the mistake, after seeing 10 different bodies of water and the reflection of the moon in them, that we have 10 different moons, would you? But this is the state of the human mind. We're attached to things. Well, I saw the moon in the previous lake. This must be a new moon. No, get your head out of the lakes and look up in the sky and you will see the one true moon. It's an analogy. The scholars of the various schools of Buddhism, confused as to the nature of Buddhas of their own school, and more fundamentally ignorant of the Buddha of the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, mistake the reflection in the water for the actual moon. That's what I just said. Some of them entering the water and trying to grasp it in their hands. Others attempting to snare it with a rope. As Tendai says, they know nothing of the moon in the sky, but gaze only at the moon in the pond. Man, Nichiren is lowering the boom on his students. Like, come on, get this, right? Having pondered this, I am of the opinion that though the Lotus Sutra teaches that persons of the two vehicles can attain Buddhahood, this view tends to be overshadowed by the opposite view propounded in the sutras that precede the Lotus. How much more so is this the case with the doctrine that the Buddha attained enlightenment in the remote past? For in this case, it is not the Lotus Sutra as a whole that stands in contradiction to the earlier sutras, but the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra that stands in contradiction both to the earlier sutras and to the first 14 chapters of the theoretical teachings of the Lotus. Moreover, of the latter 14 chapters of the essential teachings, all of them, with the exception of the emerging from the earth and lifespan chapters, retain the view that the Buddha first attained enlightenment in his present lifetime. So Nichiren, again, as I've said before, amazing scholar, right? Especially for his day. Preceded by other amazing scholars, Tendai being one we reference often, right? So, even in the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren is saying, look, this is the ultimate of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings, of the scholarship of Buddhism, and how Buddhism is a method toward realizing our innate Buddha nature. But even within the Lotus, it's constructed in a way to create a convincing argument. It's not simply a manual of how do you practice Buddhism. It's an argument through storytelling to make obvious how we ourselves already have access, and we simply need to make the decision. So it's not dogmatic. It's not didactic at all. It's look, stick your hand in the water. Pull your hand out. Is your hand wet? Water is wet. It doesn't tell you, go ye forth, stick your head in the water, and if you drown, you're bad, and if you stick your head out and you don't drown and breathe, you're good. It just explains the nature of water. Don't you get it, it's saying. This is all of Buddhism. Buddhism, I'm going to use this analogy again. Buddhism is like a finger pointing at the moon. The moon's already there. If you get so preoccupied in the finger pointing, you will never see the wonder of the moon. Buddhism is a finger pointing at the moon. It's saying, look, the moon is there. You must look up to see the moon. Yes, you can see it reflected in the water. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that wonderful? But look at where that mirror is coming from. The thing itself. This is the scholarship of Buddhism. This is why I maintain it's not a religion, because it's not trying to convince you to do some magical thing in order to get someplace else. It's simply saying, look where you are. Can you not see this for yourself? It doesn't make any allusions to anything outside of what your personal experience is. All it does is encourage you to hone that experience. That's amazing. The 40 volumes of Mahaparinirvana Sutra, preached by the Buddha in the grove of sal trees just before his passing, as well as the other Mahayana sutras except the Lotus Sutra, have not one single word to say about the fact that the Buddha attained enlightenment in the remote past, which again is a skillful means, a device, right? They speak of the Dharma body of the Buddha as being without beginning and without end. There it is. But they do not reveal the true nature of the other two bodies, the reward body and the manifested body, which is our own realization of that timeless Buddha-ness. How, then, can we expect people to cast aside the vast body of writings represented by the earlier Mahayana Sutras, the Nirvana Sutra, and the major portion of the theoretical and essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra, and put all their resolute mind of determination simply in the 2 chapters emerging from the earth, us, and the lifespan chapter, Buddha? If we examine the origins of the school called Dharma characteristics, we find that 900 years after the Buddha passed away in India, there was a great scholar called Bodhisattva Sangha. At night, he ascended to the inner court of the Tushita heaven, where he came before Bodhisattva Maitreya and resolved his doubts concerning the sacred teachings propounded by the Buddha during his lifetime. In the daytime, he worked to propagate the Dharma characteristics doctrines in the state of Ayodhya. Among his disciples were various great scholars such as Vasubandhu, Dharmapada, Nanda, and Shilabhadra. The great ruler, King Shiladitya, bowed his head in reverence, and the people of all 5 regions of India abandoned their arrogance and declared themselves followers of his teachings. The Tripitaka master Hutsang, of China journeyed to India, spending 17 years visiting 130 or more Indian states. He rejected all the other teachings of Buddhism, but brought back the doctrines of the Dharma characteristic schools to China and presented them to the worthy sovereign Emperor Taizong. Xuanzang numbered among his disciples such men as Shengfang, Qiangshang, Pu'Kang, and Kuichi. He preached his teachings in Tatsuin Temple and spread them through more than 360 districts of China. In the reign of Emperor Kotoku, the 37th sovereign of Japan, Dosho, and other priests went to China and studied these doctrines, and on their return preached at the Yamashina Dera temple. In this way, the Dharma characteristic schools was regarded as the leading school of Buddhism throughout all 3 lands of India, China, and Japan. According to this school, in all the teachings of the Buddha, from the Flower Garland Sutra, the earliest of the sutras, to the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras, which were preached last, it is laid down that those sentient beings without the true nature of enlightenment and those predestined for the 2 vehicles can never become Buddhas. The Buddha, they say, never contradicts himself. Therefore, if he has once declared that these people will never be able to attain Buddhahood, then even should the sun and moon fall to the earth, or the great earth itself turn upside down, that declaration can never be altered. In the earlier sutras, those sentient beings, without the nature of enlightenment, and those predestined for the 2 vehicles, were said to be incapable of attaining Buddhahood. Therefore, they conclude, even the Lotus or Nirvana Sutra is never said that they can in fact do so. Quote, "Close your eyes and consider the matter," end quote. The members of the Dharma characteristic schools would say, quote, if it had in fact been plainly stated in the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras that those who possess no innate nature of enlightenment or those predestined for the 2 vehicles can actually attain Buddhahood, then why would the great scholars such as Asanga and Vasubandhu, or the Tripitaka masters and teachers such as Xuanzang and Zhen not have taken notice of this fact? Why did they not mention it in their own writings? Why did they not accept the belief and transmit it to later ages? Why did Asanga not question Bodhisattva Maitreya about it? People like you, Nichiren, claim that you are basing your assertion on the text of the Lotus Sutra, but in fact you are simply accepting the biased views of men like Tendai, Miaolo, and Dengyo, and interpreting the text of the sutra in the light of their teachings. Therefore you claim that the Lotus Sutra is as different from the earlier sutras as fire from water, end quote. Again, the arrogance of this. Again, Nichiren says, there are the Flower Garland and True Word schools which are of incomparably higher level than the Dharma characteristics and 3 treatises schools, They claim that the doctrines that persons of the two vehicles may attain Buddhahood, and that the Buddha achieved enlightenment in the world past are to be found only in the Lotus Sutra, but in the Flower Garland and Mahabharata Sutras as well. According to these schools, the Flower Garland patriarch Tzu-chun, Qi Yin, Fa Xiang, and Cheng Kuang, and the true word masters Shan Wu Wei, Qin Kang Qi, and Pu Kung were far more eminent than Ten Dai or Deng Gyo. Moreover, they claim that Shan Wu Wei's teachings descend in an unbroken line from the thus come one Mahabharata, which, if you've been listening at all, Mahabharata is a personage of Shakyamuni. It's not a real person. But how could men like this, see, this is where the mysticism creeps in. We humans love that mysticism. How could men like this, who are manifestations of the Buddha, possibly be mistaken? I'm saying it ahead of Nichiren saying. I should just let Nichiren say it, they ask. They point to the passage in the Flower Garland Sutra that reads, "Some people perceive the immeasurable numbers of kalpas have passed since Shakyamuni attained the Buddha way," or the passage in the Mahabharata Sutra that says, quote, "I, Mahabharata Sutra, or Buddha, am the source and beginning of all things," end quote. Why, they ask, would anyone claim that it is the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra alone that expounds the doctrine that Shakyamuni attained enlightenment long ago? Persons who do so are like frogs at the bottom of a well who have never seen the great sea, or like mountain dwellers who know nothing of the capital. You people look only at the lifespan chapter and know nothing of the Flower Garland, the Mahabharata, and other sutras. Do you suppose that in India and China, and in Silla and Pakchi, Korea, people believe that these two doctrines are limited to the Lotus Sutra alone? As we have seen, the Lotus Sutra, which was preached over a period of 8 years, is quite different from the earlier sutras preached over the period of some 40 years. If one had to choose between the two, one ought by rights to choose the Lotus Sutra that was preached later. And yet, the earlier sutras, in many ways, appear to carry greater weight. Yeah, that's my math analogy comes to mind here. If you're going to believe or take something as fact for your life, probably, the clever ways of learning your earlier maths about properties of cancellation with fractions and so forth that are just shortcuts, but not really what's going on with math, should not be taken to try to put a man on the moon as the end-all of mathematics. Perhaps one should really look at the calculus and the quantum and other sciences far more evolved in mathematics as the pinnacle of mathematical thinking, and not rely solely on the maths taught to second and third and fourth graders, right? So this is what Nichiren is saying. Yes, the earlier teachings have value, everything's built on them, but obviously the ultimate teachings, the final 8 years of the teachings of Shakyamuni, should be seen as the culminating, ultimate teaching, right? All right, with that, while Buddha was still alive, we're going to continue. I don't want to make these videos too long, so we're going to continue in the next video. But it's exciting to me, and it validates my own study of over 40 years now. Whenever I reread Nichiren's Gosho, as well as other sutras, new passages, new insights come to mind every time I reread them, because my own understanding continues to evolve, as I truly trust yours does, and deep appreciation for your participation. As always, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.